This week on The Record, the lieutenant governor launches his campaign. How Mike Kehoe hopes to connect with Missouri voters. We met him on the site of a state park campground. How he's responding to Jay Ashcroft's campaign, labeling him Tax Hike Mike. Plus, House Minority Leader Crystal Quade comes on the record. How abortion could supercharge statewide races in 2024. And might you see her name on that ballot? And Parson's pick. Which candidates could Governor Mike Parson appoint to become the next St. Louis Circuit Attorney? Former federal judge Nannette Baker has legal analysis for the record. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. Thank you for joining us. The November 2024 general election may still be about a year and a half away, but campaign season is already underway. The shoes of top Missouri politicians had just barely hit the concrete on their way out of the State House last week when they went right toward the campaign trail. Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft had last month announced his plans to run for governor, saying Missouri Republicans had, quote, failed to deliver. And on Tuesday this week, he gained his first official rival, Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe. We caught up with Kehoe on the campgrounds of the Babbler State Park earlier this morning. I watched your campaign launch video, but I was looking for some ideas or some specifics about the direction you wanted to take the state. What direction would you take the state of Missouri?
Well, that's what we're going to be talking about now for the next 446 days. The launch video was mainly to tell people who I am and what my background was and what I've been able to go through with our family. And so that was more of an introduction of who Mike Kehoe is. But to answer your question, we're going to focus on four primary areas. I'm a conservative, so it goes without saying that protecting innocent life and Second Amendment rights, those are something I feel very strongly in and have voted to protect before. But our four key areas that we're going to be working on are crime, which is something that no matter what part of the state I go to, rural or urban, people are asking me about crime. Education opportunities for our children, economic development opportunities. I think I'm good at selling the state and what we can do there. And of course, agriculture, our number one industry, what we can do to expand that for our 95,000 family farmers.
So guns, crime, abortion, education, and economic development.
Well,
those are five things.
Yeah, but the four core things, so the basic fundamental rights, I just wanted to make sure folks know that pro-life and Second Amendment is a core part of me. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean we're not focusing on it. But crime, education, economic development, and agriculture will be what we concentrate on. I'm
still trying to learn who's who in Missouri. Only
Sure.
haven't been here about a year or so. And when I talk to Democrats and Republicans in the legislature, they describe you with some modicum of respect, but also describe you as a moderate. Do you feel that the Missouri legislature has gone too far on either the direction of guns or abortion?
Well, both parties have people that are extreme left and extreme right. And that's what Missouri is. I don't know that I'm a moderate. I would consider myself a conservative that's willing to talk to people even when they don't agree with me. Based on my retail business that I've had over almost 35 years, I never could afford to draw a line in the sand. I always had to understand where you were, and even if I didn't agree with your position, find something that maybe we did agree on to move forward. And I think that's what most people across the state want.
You said extreme left and extreme right. How do you describe we got these bugs out here at the campsite. It's kind of fun.
That's good. It's Missouri.
Yeah, it's Missouri.
Yeah.
That's more Missouri than Missouri, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. You described the extreme left and the extreme right. How do you describe the influence of, can we use the word extremism in politics? Is it helping or hurting?
Well, I think the extremism on both sides of the aisle, if you will, really have kind of gotten steam out of social media. As you've seen the rise of social media and people are wanting clicks and likes and all those things, they're trying to appeal to a certain part of their party that really jumps in on the social media. I've never been a keyboard warrior. I'm more of a people person. I like to be able to try to figure out where folks are, talk to them face to face, and then again, try to find out without compromising my core values, try to find out a way to move Missouri forward.
Can Missouri Republicans have a primary race for governor that stays positive on the issues, or are we going to have to brace for some of that ugly stuff?
Yeah, I think that's where politics is today. I'm like you and most other people. We had people this morning saying, hey, can you run a campaign without saying anything negative? Well, I could, yes. But every candidate will have a political action committee or a PAC, and that what their PAC says or does is outside of the candidate. And so that's where you get into the issues of what goes negative and what doesn't.
They do the dirty work for you.
Well, even though Missourians and most people across the country would say we want a positive message and a positive campaign, the unfortunate fact about politics is negativity sometimes moves the needle more than positivity does.
Well, you also have to vet the opposition, and the public needs to know who those people
Right.
are. There was a little trace of that in your launch video where you said, and I'm paraphrasing it here, but something to the effect of you weren't born into some political family. You kind of made a jab at Jay Ashcroft, didn't you?
No, I mean, a lot of politicians that are in office today in all parts of the country, including in Missouri, have come from a political family that have been in some form of governance for a long time.
Why raise that issue?
Well, because my point is that I came from the roots. I'm from North City. I came scratching through life. I didn't have anything handed to me. None of my family members did. Certainly not my mother. And so our point of that is that I think Missourians can relate with somebody who was born literally with nothing and worked hard to get somewhere, and that's what our point is.
A meritocracy.
Well, the American dream.
Do you feel that is changing for the next generation of Americans?
Yeah, I think it's probably changing a little bit, yes.
What's driving that?
Again, I think the world of, where we're at with social media and who's doing what, who's saying what, I think that with certain segments of the voting electorate, that seems to get traction.
The Ashcroft campaign was ready to go with a nickname, Tax Hike Mike.
Yeah.
Do you have a nickname to respond with? Or
I've never been great at nicknames, but if they want to put a nickname on, that's fine. I think at the end of the day, what Missourians will understand is that either as the leader in the Senate when I was the floor leader, or as Lieutenant Governor presiding over the two of the largest tax cuts that's ever happened in the state of Missouri, and I've cut way more taxes than I proposed. The issue that they're talking about was our proposition to try to increase the fuel tax so that Missourians could invest more into the road and investment in our road and bridge system. And the reality was, when I was proposing that in 2013 and 14, nobody had had that conversation since the early 90s, when then John Ashcroft proposed and passed a gas tax on Missourians as a way to fund infrastructure, and that's what that's about.
I think most reasonable people understand that different policies adapt to different problems of the time, and that you hope that within the extreme polar opposites there can be some understanding, okay, we've got to adjust government to fit the problem of the day. Are gas taxes in Missouri too high right now?
Yes, compared to other states, no, not at all. We're still in the lower quartile of where our gas taxes are compared to other states. And what Missourians have to realize is we have the 7th road system in the United States and the 6th largest bridge system in the United States.
And they don't pay for themselves.
No, they don't pay for themselves. It's a user fee. A gas tax truly is a user fee. People might laugh and say, well, we're not going to walk or ride our bike, but if you do, you're not paying the gas tax. Are you paying?
Or if you're driving an electric vehicle.
Our electric vehicle, well, there's a little bit of now a push to try to catch up for that as they become more popular. But at the end of the day, if you don't use the system, you don't pay the gas tax. So it's truly a user fee.
You're a car guy. How should the gas tax, road tax, mileage tax evolve to capture the changing market? A lot more electric vehicles are going to be on the road over the next 8 years. Should you be in office a term or two, you might have to confront an issue like that.
Well, part of the initiative that was passed by the House and Senate a couple of years ago establishes a group that is getting together to look at how electric vehicles should be taxed. Right now there's a tag that somebody buys and pays an annual fee. It's probably not exactly the same as the amount they would have paid in gas tax, because now you're seeing tractor trailers. Delivery companies are prototyping electric tractor trailers up and down the highway. So certainly what their use of the highway is going to be much different than, a Ford F-150 Lightning. So this group is meeting to figure out what would be the proper way to assess a commensurate tax, if you will, on electric vehicles that would equal if they were driving in gas. So that conversation is getting some steam, and I think there will be a solution that comes out of that.
Let's go back to the primary real quick. In the presidential primary right now, we're seeing an array of ideas, whether it's from former Vice President Mike Pence, former President Trump, or Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on the issue of abortion. And they're trying to figure out what the national policy might be, what state policies could be. My first question is, we expect to see an abortion question on the ballot in November 2024. House Speaker Dean Plocher and others have suggested voters might not agree with the current ban in Missouri. What effect do you think that ballot question will have on your political prospects or the state overall?
Well, it'll certainly generate a lot of questions and a lot of conversation. But at the end of the day, I believe Missouri to be a pro-life state. And I think protecting innocent life is the most critical thing an elected official can do. Now, if Missourians decide to do something different on that issue, should that ballot question come in November of '24, then I guess it would be up to Missourians to decide. I will be on the side of keeping the way the process is now.
Say your prediction was right and Missouri voters end up saying we're going to keep this in place and they reject the question. Would you be comfortable with the current restrictions that have a near total ban on all abortions in Missouri, or do you think there's room for some exceptions?
Well, I've always been a person that said should be some exceptions, but I do accept the current law that is here right now.
What exceptions are those? Well,
I would say in the case of rape or incest.
And life of the mother?
Life of the mother would be another one we'd have to look at. That's what you do is you start going down. Rape and incest can be, I don't want to use the term black and white or cut and dry, but it's an unfortunate, horrible situation that
a crime
is a crime and is very understandably something that we can understand that happens. When you get into life of the mother, certainly you and I or anybody who's watching the show would say, if this woman's going to die and there's a way to try to save her life, we would all agree that's probable. What you don't want to do is open up a loophole that allows that to be widened for some reason.
But I guess why would a politician make that decision, not a doctor?
Well, politicians are really there to set the policy piece, which is we want to protect innocent life.
Give us a preview of this. Do you think Bill Eigel has a shot in this primary?
I think anybody who gets in that wants to work hard, go out and meet Missourians has a shot. I would take anybody who decides to get in or is in as a serious competitor, so yeah.
And my last question, you've been very generous with your time, thank you for that, but what would be your commitment, one, to engage the press throughout this primary, and two, to stand and debate your opponents?
I'm ready to debate whenever they would want to debate. That would be fine with me. Like I said, my background is very different, and I think that's a good way for Missourians to see what the difference in the issues are. I've always had a good relationship with the press. Most of your counterparts will tell you that I've always tried to stay very open to them. As long as we have press people that are fair and play both sides fair, I'm good with that.
All right. Well, it's nice to take the tie off for an interview every once in a while.
Yeah, it is. It's great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for coming out to Missouri State Park.
You bet. Joining us now on the record is House Minority Leader Crystal Quade. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
As you travel the state,
a little bit,
people might look at that and think she's got her eye on a bigger prize. Do you hope to run for governor?
You know, we're definitely looking at it now that session's over. We're taking it seriously, and I'm hopeful to be able to let folks know soon what my plans are.
Can a Democrat win a statewide race in Missouri?
Absolutely, a Democrat can, yes.
How?
You know, it wasn't that long ago that we were holding almost every statewide office, and how we win it is by both turning out in the cities, by activating rural voters and getting, you know, several 100,000 folks in rural Missouri as well. It has to be a both and of course registering new voters. We have a lot of folks throughout the state who could be voting who aren't.
If only it were that easy.
If only.
What message draws those people out to vote?
I think for me the most important message that I have gotten feedback from is local messages to what matters to folks in the area. You know, in Jefferson City, we the folks like to hyper analyze everything and really make things really global. We talk about culture war issues that sometimes have no impact on Missouri. What I think voters really want is for somebody to knock on their door and talk to them about what matters there locally. Is their school funded? You know, what kind of controls does the local community and their local elected leaders have over what happens to them in their homes? And so for me, it's really about localizing it.
A lot of the rhetoric coming out of Jefferson City, from Jefferson City, about St. Louis during this last session was a lot about crime and violence. Can Democrats speak to that in a way that wins voters' hearts and minds? I
think so. You know, one thing that I will say that's been extremely surprising to me as somebody from Springfield, the past 7 years I've been in the legislature, is how much Jefferson City targets St. Louis. As one of the largest, you know, economic drivers of our state, the attacks to St. Louis has been really fascinating to me. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or Democrat. You want to feel safe in your home. You want your community to be a place that your kids can ride their bikes down the street and feel comfortable doing so. And so again, I think the conversation really needs to be about what is happening on the ground. It's really easy for folks in Jefferson City to say what the city of St. Louis should be doing, but I want to hear from the folks who live directly here about what fixes they see that would be helpful.
You might have seen some of the video recently of people open carrying large rifles down the streets of St. Louis, sort of a chaotic scene in the streets of St. Louis. That's totally legal.
Totally legal.
I understand that Democrats, yourself among them, want to change that. Are there some avenues that you can explore to actually get that done?
Yeah, and that specific conversation was really frustrating this year because there was a bipartisan group of lawmakers, both Democrats and Republicans, who spent a ton of time during the interim, during the off season, working on trying to find a crime package that made sense. Representative Donna Behringer here from St. Louis actually was one of the ones who was leading the charge on trying to change the law so that children can't walk down a street open carrying with, just without any repercussions. And that was overwhelmingly supported by Republicans in that committee, in the working group, through the entire process until we got it up to the House floor is when we then started to hear pushback from folks. Making this, saying that Democrats don't care about the Second Amendment, that we want to take everyone's guns away on the House floor. Now, in private conversations with the Republican electeds, they say, of course, a child should not be walking down the street unaccompanied, with a gun. So to answer your question, is there room for this? Absolutely, there's room for this because they, off the mic, will have these conversations with us, but more importantly, voters are telling us that they want to see some serious change, and the more pressure that voters are putting onto the elected lawmakers, I do believe it's going to get better.
I wonder what the disconnect is between their private feelings and their public comments. When you look at just recently a Fox News poll that came out, a range of gun proposals from background checks to red flag laws to a number of different things like banning assault weapons even, the support ranges from 60, 70, upwards to 80% for some of these proposals in a Fox News poll. So what's the disconnect? If that's where public support lies, how come it doesn't reach the legislature?
I believe that this conversation falls in line with all the other culture war conversations where privately Republican lawmakers will say, yes, I agree with you that this is too extreme. But when it comes to actually voting, they vote the extreme way. And where I believe the disconnect falls is with the era of term limits. We see Republican lawmakers running against each other in primary elections for whatever the next seat is, and so they're constantly trying to out-extreme each other. And unfortunately, this conversation around gun safety falls right into that, and lives are on the line.
A lot of House and Senate leadership, Republicans in the House and Senate, really wanted to raise the bar, make it harder to change the Constitution in Missouri. They couldn't get that done this session. Is there still time for them to do that before November 2024?
No.
Should they? So that's...
If they were to do it next session, it would go on the ballot in 2024. So it would be on the ballot at the same time as the election.
So we expect to see a question on the ballot for voters in November 2024 about this question of abortion.
If the signatures are collected and everything goes correct, yes.
What should that question read? What should the question be for voters?
Right now, actually, I believe today there was a court case, and I haven't heard the ruling on that yet, regarding the language of the actual ballot language and the fiscal note accompanying that. There's been a few hiccups along the way that I believe the groups who were organizing around were fully anticipating this happening, the debate around what the language actually is. And we know that Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft wants to, the language that I saw that was drafted was essentially lying to voters. And we know that the Attorney General, the state auditor, Scott Fitzpatrick, actually put out a statement that he wasn't going to lie to voters about the cost of this. And if folks want to dig into that, there's a whole lot of story around that. But I say all that in that we still don't know what the language is going to be when it is on the ballot in 2024, but hopefully we'll find out soon.
So there's some back and forth over the fine print, the political infighting over what to actually put on the ballot. But what should it say? What should the moral question or the political question be that you put to voters on this issue of abortion?
Yeah, I'm not going to say exactly what the language should be because I am not an attorney drafting it, but here's what I can tell you that voters and folks who have contacted my office are the most frustrated about is the complete government overreach that we are seeing in our healthcare systems. And the trans conversation falls right into that. We are seeing a government that is continuously going into spaces that should not be reserved for governments to have access into, and that is the doctor's office. And so I'm hopeful that the language will be able to support the ability for an individual to go in and seek the healthcare access that they need, and government will stay out of it.
Let me reframe the question. Sometimes candidates running for Congress will say, we want to put Roe in federal law. But even Roe versus Wade, that decision, the Supreme Court justices recognize that the state can have an interest in regulating or restricting some abortions in that third trimester. Is that a reasonable standard?
I think that it is for some discussions, right? Every state is a little bit different. And so when you're looking at what the Supreme Court has said, pushing it back to the states, voters have different opinions on what that threshold should be. I have my own opinions
Which
that
is?
It would, I think that, no, you're fine. I personally believe that, again, government should stay out of decisions that doctors and their patients are making.
No restrictions at all.
I do think that there is a room for conversation around viability, but not everybody agrees with me on that, right? And there are folks in my district down in Springfield who feel more extreme one way or the other. Some folks don't want to have the conversation at all, which is why I think the fact that government is getting in the way of this is the problem in the first place.
I see. Is there an opportunity was there any chance for the legislature to take action on this issue on its own, or was the plan always just to put this to voters in 2024?
Oh, there absolutely there's a way. I filed bills. Of course, lots of Democrats filed bills to try to undo what was passed in 2019. There were bills filed to even make it more accessible than that, because Missouri's laws have always been very restrictive. But the reality is, with the Republican supermajority in Jefferson City, there's just no pathway for something like that to pass. We see that through the initiative petition all the time, where the voters have told the legislature, we want Medicaid expansion, we want a higher minimum wage, we want no on right to work laws, and the legislature wasn't listening, so folks utilize the initiative petition process, and so we're not surprised that it's here.
On Tuesday this week, Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe threw his head into the ring to run for governor of Missouri in the Republican primary. What kind of a governor would he make?
I think that Lieutenant Governor Kehoe is somebody that a lot of folks get along with well. He is considered kind of a moderate, but what I would say back to that is the reality is right now in Republican politics in Missouri, again with a primary that we're going to see between the Secretary of State and Lieutenant Governor Kehoe, they're going to out extreme each other. And there is, when you look at the voting records of individuals, again, what they might say to you versus what they actually vote are two very different things. And I think that Mike Kehoe will fall in line with all the extremes happening in Jefferson City.
You might have just answered my next question, but what kind of a governor would Jay Ashcroft make?
I would say the exact same, right? Jay Ashcroft has very publicly expressed his frustrations with some of the moderate decisions that have happened this year in Jefferson City. We got some actually good pieces of legislation through that I would love to talk about as well. And he's expressed some frustrations around that. And most recently on a radio station even went after the right for gay folks to be married, and very publicly has opposed that. And so he is very extreme, and I expect if he was governor that he would rule the same way.
All right, if people were interested in watching, should a campaign announcement unfold soon, what should they circle on their calendar? Is there a timeline?
I don't want to put out a timeline right now. Like I said, we just wrapped up session on Friday, so we just finished, and so we're really digging in now to look at the landscape, look at what's going on across the state, because for me, when I'm making a decision like this, it's not just about the governor's race. We've got the U.S. Senate race. We have several state House and state Senate races that are extremely important, a lot of them that we can flip red to blue, where we can make serious inroads in the supermajority that the Republicans have right now. And so I believe that we as a party and folks who are looking at running need to really look at this holistically and see what's best for our state.
All right, a long way to go should you jump in. We'd love to have you back to learn about what kind of a Democrat you are and where you might fit in a primary field. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And it is crunch time for Mike Parson. The governor will be picking a replacement for St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, who resigned her office abruptly on Tuesday, creating an immediate vacancy in that crucial role, administering justice in the courthouse. Parson has said he plans to pick her replacement tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock. We turn now to retired federal judge Nannette Baker, who joins us with legal analysis for the record. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I want to ask an obvious and practical question, but it's a question that also has legal weight. Do defendants, people charged with and accused of violent crimes in the city of St. Louis, do they have the access to a speedy trial right now?
Well, obviously they haven't had speedy trials recently here in the city of St. Louis. Under the Constitution, the defendants do have the right to a speedy trial. In the federal system, we have a 70-day rule, even though cases don't get to trial in 70 days because there are exclusionary times. We do attempt to get those cases to trial as soon as possible. And what's been happening here in the city of St. Louis is, as we know, there are cases that have been languishing for years. And what the prosecutor's office has been doing, my understanding is, they dismiss and refile the cases. And I believe when they do that, that tolls the speedy trial clock. It starts it over when it gets refiled. So it's a real problem for people who have been detained.
And that's a constitutional right in the Sixth Amendment, this right to a speedy trial. Often when people encounter inefficient government, they can sort of just brush it off as, well, roll your eyes, shrug your shoulders, that's the way government is. In this case, we see clear and convincing evidence as these different investigations were unfolding, that it wasn't just an invisible ghost or some boogeyman that we couldn't define. There was a specific list of obstacles in front of that speedy trial. The reason I lay that out is I wonder, is there enough evidence, if someone was to bring a lawsuit or a charge in front of you, and you were wearing the robes in a federal court, and they said, our constitutional rights are being violated here, what would you say?
I mean, it would be an interesting case to bring. I have not ever seen that. I've never seen, because we were talking about cases that are here in the state court system, and yes, they do have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. The question would be, what would be their remedy, and the remedy in these cases. So generally, if they fail to bring a case to trial in a timely manner, the remedy is dismissal of the case. And so that should be the avenue that the defense attorneys would be taking if they wanted to resolve the case, as opposed to bringing it as a constitutional matter.
So not like a big payout or damages. It
Right.
would just be to let them out of jail, where some of them
Right.
sit now and have
drop
for
the
5
charges.
years. Drop the charges.
Drop the charges. So they're no longer charged with those offenses. And then you look at where's the fairness for the victims in the case if that happened. I mean, that's the problem with this entire delay, is that it has affected both people who are charged and have not had those charges resolved, and the victims of the crimes.
Innocent until proven guilty, sort of.
And there may be people who have been detained who would not be found guilty, and so they've spent 4 or 5 years in jail, and for something that they may not be found guilty of.
I'm sure you appreciate the values inherent in that promise of a speedy trial, but what was the whole goal there? When we set out to endeavor and say we're not going to just throw people away, throw people in jail, and throw away the key. What was the promise of a speedy trial? What was the value inherent in that?
Well, the value is getting justice done, making sure, the reason that you want to have a speedy trial is, first of all, even from the prosecutor's standpoint, you've got evidence. You don't want your evidence to get stale. But also, defendants do have the right to have these cases brought against them and resolved as quickly as possible. So not everyone is detained. Sometimes people are let out on bond and are waiting for their case, but you can't go on with your life if you just have these charges hanging over you.
We're getting a lot of questions from viewers, frustrated by the wheels of justice grinding to a halt here, and some of them are expressing frustration that Kim Gardner can walk away, accept a government pension, and just sort of move on and leave this big problem behind her. Have you seen any evidence that would suggest she faces any other kind of consequence?
The only other consequence would be if someone brought some sort of a bar complaint against her, made some sort of formal complaint regarding her work, anything that she may have done, and then that would possibly lead to a suspension or a disbarment or something along those lines. And I have not heard that has happened yet, but that would be one of the consequences, and that's the only thing that I can think of, actually.
As we transition in the closing minutes of this conversation here, Governor Mike Parson is expected to pick Kim Gardner's replacement, the next circuit attorney, who would stay in that office until January of 2025, tomorrow morning. Our Christine Byers has reported that short list has whittled down to include the names of a lawyer and a judge. Michael Noble, the judge, and Gabe Gore, an attorney. Do you know these men? Can you speak to their reputation? And what kind of a decision does the governor have on his hands?
Thanks for surprising me. I had not heard who the names were.
I didn't know if you had or not.
I did not, but I do know both of them. I know Judge Noble. I've known him for many years. He was a commissioner, a drug court commissioner at the circuit court back when I was on the circuit court, has been an associate circuit judge and a circuit judge, has a good reputation in the community, and he's genuinely a nice person. I also know Gabe Gore. I've known him for many years. He works at the Dowd Bennett firm, and he also has a very good reputation in the community. So I would say that the governor couldn't go wrong with either one of them.
A ringing endorsement. There we go. Nannette Baker, thank you for joining us, a retired federal judge. A pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
The Illinois legislature is wrapping up its work even now. They have a deadline facing tomorrow. Next week, we hope to hear from U.S. Congressman Mike Bost, as he could face a primary challenge from Darren Bailey, that Republican who ran for governor. That could be happening in Southern Illinois. We'll learn more about that next week. Until then, we're off the record.